morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farrokh, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And today, folks, we have one of the best sales leaders of all time, someone who's good-looking, handsome, charming, charismatic, and was VP of sales at a very young age. I think he had a little bit fluffy stuff, but we got some good tactics in there. His name is, it's me.
It's you, dude. You know, I thought when you became a sales leader, you lost your outbound chops, but you did not, because this episode is about outbounding sales talent to build the best possible sales team that you can. We get into everything from your strategy as it relates to outbounding, the types of profiles that you looked for, how you reached out to people, the specific messaging in that outreach, how you would work your recruiters to get the best talent for you and the most number of screens so you had the best possible pool, how you would run your intro calls, and how you would get people to become part of the team at Pave. This was the best episode I've heard on recruiting outbound sales talent. Let's get into the show.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
All right, Armand, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get your 3.
Number 1, the best reps are never looking, and so you need to always be sourcing, even if you're knocking on doors where you know the reps are not looking. So my cadence in the early stages of Pave is I would reach out to 25 to 50 reps every single week, and all of those reps would get a 3-step drip from me. The first message was a brief introduction of, I assume that you're doing totally fine over there, but I'd love to connect, give you a sense of what we're building, and if nothing else, keep the door down the road. The second was a bubble up, and then the third was a farewell.
Awesome. What's number 2?
Number 2 is send on behalf of. So a lot of times when you get to scale in an organization, you have recruiters doing outbound sourcing for you instead of doing it yourself. And you will see a massive drop off if your recruiters are sending messaging from their names instead of sending messaging from your names. So there are a series of different tools that allow you to do this. Think, if you're a salesperson, think Outreach or SalesLoft or Gong Engage for recruiters, where recruiters can actually send in your name. And I will typically see a 20 to 30% uptick in replies just by having recruiters send from my inbox instead of sending from their inbox.
Very nice. Round us out. What's number 3?
Number 3 is the first call. If you think you can outbound a candidate, jump on a first interview, and just start grilling the shit out of them, you are horribly mistaken. You first need to understand why they jumped on the call at all, give a mini pitch on what you're building, and then from there, use the remainder of the time to understand why they were successful and give them a chance to brag about their achievements so that at the end you can come back and say, you know, this might be crazy, but I think you're the kind of person who could help us build this team from the ground up. You have to sell them into the interview process when you're doing outbound recruiting.
So I remember when you were first building the team at Pave, Armand, you were slammed. You were still prospecting for the company. You were closing deals. You were building out all of the tech in the sales process. And then you also took it upon yourself to outbound for talent. And most people would say, why on earth would you do that? Why not just put up a job posting and talk to the people that apply? Talk to me about your strategy related to outbounding for talent.
Yeah, and so look, you might be a company like Gong, for example, where you have this amazing name, you're respected in the world of sales tech, everyone wants to work for you, and you get 3 billion inbound applications. But for most teams, especially early stage teams, when I was the 9th employee at Pave, no one knew who we were. And so we would still get dozens and dozens and dozens of inbound applications, but they were never good. So I would spend time taking these recruiter screens and interviewing all of these reps who were frankly like, okay, or they were like slightly off our ideal candidate profile. And I would spend all of these hours meeting these people with these interviews that would never actually go anywhere. And the reason for that is I knew when you're building a team from scratch or when you're making your first hires, even if you're like a first-time manager, your reputation is on the line based on the first 2 to 3 people that you hire. And chances are you're going to have to go and find those reps. And so for me, instead of wasting all of that time taking these screens, I said, don't even give me these screens, or recruiters, you take the inbound screens, because frankly, they're inbound and they're going to be a little bit more likely to go through a screen. And I'm going to spend my time picking the perfect profiles that I can see in the market and trying to get them to opt into an interview process.
So I presume you were going through LinkedIn and that's who you were looking for profiles. How did you define what your ICP for a rep was?
Different for every stage of company and for your sales motion. The three things that were most important for me were as follows. Number one, it was early stage, and so I wanted to match stage on stage. And so, for example, at Pave, we were early stage. I was looking for people who had worked in a growth stage environment. I was not looking for people who had worked in a super early stage environment only, because oftentimes what that means is you never actually learned good habits. I'm looking for someone who's been at a hypergrowth startup, has seen that rapid scale, but has also been part of a team where they taught you how to do discovery so that you can bring that speed down to the early stages because you want a little bit more autonomy. That's number one. So matching stage on stage. Number two is matching sales cycle to sales cycle. And so I was hiring mid-market AEs. And so it was really, really important to me that I wasn't hiring someone who was doing one-call closes, or even if they were doing a slightly more transactional motion. For example, the first rep that I hired, her name was Morgan Mello. She's outstanding, our number one all-time producer. She was doing a more transactional deal cycle, but she tested really, really well for her consultative discovery skills, which led me to believe that she was going to scale. So that's number two. But then the number three thing is I was oftentimes looking for acceleration in their resume. And this is where you start to get a proxy for how good someone is. So I'm either looking that they've made President's Club, they had a certain high attainment, or they've gotten multiple quick promotions in succession. And that tells me that they were a quick riser. Now notice, industry expertise was not part of my criteria. That's a nice to have. I was selling HR tech. Frankly, I learned HR tech pretty quickly. I also sold fintech. You can learn fintech quickly. Most people overestimate industry experience, and unless you're in something that's like gov tech, you do not need industry experience in most cases. It's not easy to find those first three characteristics. If you find someone who's not in your industry, but they made club, they understand your sales cycle, and they have the right stage match, go hire them versus the person who sold fintech but doesn't have those things.
I want to zoom in on a bit on the types of companies that these people work with. What I heard from you is you looked for folks who were at growth stage companies. And ideally, they joined when they were kind of small, sort of startup-y, and were there to the point that there was some scale and there was some process and the team got bigger. So maybe somebody who joined a company at Series B and was there until they hit Series D. Obviously, this was 2 or 3 years ago, Armand, but I'm wondering, were there specific company names where you were like, hey, these were the types that I was looking for? Not necessarily so listeners can go outbound people who work at those companies, but so they understand the types of companies.
I'll give you an example of the upper and the lower bound. So what I would describe to people is a couple years ago, Slack went public. And I would usually say the latest that I want an AE is Slack just before IPO. Growing quickly, and they're still like these teams are still operating and growing. You're oftentimes getting chances to build out new teams. Oftentimes the sales motion is launching more and more products, so you have to learn these things. It's not like you're just doing these big quarterbacking of deals like at Oracle or Salesforce or something like that. That would be the upper bound. The lower bound, frankly, a lot of the people in the audience wouldn't know the names because the lower bound would be reasonably low. But my marker was, did they have a true sales leader in place? I don't mean like a rep that turned into a manager. I'm like, did they have someone who's actually a formal head of sales and a VP of sales? Or were they reporting into a CEO or like a super rep player coach who's just sort of figuring it out on the fly? That usually led you to companies that were around 100 employees, which usually had a sales team size of about 8.
How many reps would you outbound at any given time?
I would usually go after 25 to 50 reps per week, which ends up being 5 to 10 per day, which is not that hard.
And were you keeping track of these in like your sales engagement platform? Did you have an Excel sheet? How did you keep track of who you were reaching out to and where they were?
Yeah, so this isn't a sponsored show. We don't sell to recruiters. And so we were using a tool called Gem. There are other tools like that, but think of Gem as like outreach for recruiters, where basically I would use Sales Nav to filter for show me companies at this size and show me account executive with these titles and companies this employee count, funding stage, etc. And then I would get a list of all of those companies. And then what you can do is you can basically export all of those LinkedIn profiles into Gem and then enroll them in outbound recruiting sequences. So I was managing them the exact same way that you would normally manage your own outbound pipeline, which is I had my own mini recruiting CRM with my mini recruiting sales engagement platform.
Cool. So let's talk about, you said you had a 3-step drip. It sounds like you weren't cold calling potential talent. You weren't cold emailing. You were exclusively messaging on LinkedIn. Talk to me about what went into that messaging. So that first message, which is the, hey, I don't assume you're looking, but here's why I want to meet. What did that actually sound like?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to read off a message that I sent to an AE that led to an interview. There are 3 parts of the message. The first is what I notice about you. The second is why what we're doing is interesting. The third is a low friction call to action. Notice if you've listened to any of our cold email content, it sounds really similar and it's amazing. Sales language works better than these canned recruiter pitches, which is like, welcome to the amazing company of Pave. We have great benefits, great 401k, amazing attainment, all this stuff. It's like, no, people want to notice that you notice something about them and there's something that you specifically are doing at your company that tells you that they're a fit. And then they want a low friction call to action. So it says, hey, John, my guess is you're totally crushing it over at Acme Co., but I'm giving this a shot because we have a pretty similar sales motion and I'm hiring my 4th AE at Pave. We just raised the biggest Series A all time from Andreessen Horowitz out of Y Combinator, and there's big upside being part of the first 5 to 10 reps. Are you opposed to hearing more, if nothing else, to make the connection? That's it. He replied on the first one, and you know what he said? He said, appreciate you reaching out. Things have gone well at my company, but I wouldn't be opposed to a call to hear more. It sounds like you guys are doing some interesting things at Pave. And then from there, that brings me into the sell call. If he didn't reply, I would just send another note that said, any thoughts? And then if he finally didn't reply one more time, I would give them a couple of stats. So I would say, hey, John, I'm going to assume that this isn't a fit right now. I just wanted to share a couple things about our sales org to leave behind for you, just in case you end up looking. So number 1, here's how many reps we have. Here was our funding. Here was our average team attainment. And here's the type of person we're looking for. If not you, is there anyone else who you know might be looking? And that would oftentimes either get me a response or get me a referral.
What was the spacing from a time perspective in between each of those messages?
Yeah, very similar to the first couple steps in an outbound drip. It was usually day 1, day 3, and then I would usually wait for it to jump to the next week, 3 or 4 more days, and that would usually be day 6 or 7. And so if you think of how that hits someone, I would send them a message on Tuesday, I would bubble it up on Thursday or Friday, and then I would send them the breakup on Wednesday the following week. There's a chance that I caught them out of office for a 2-week vacation. If they were on a 2-week vacation, they probably shouldn't join a startup anyways.
So when you were outbounding, oftentimes the first impression that these people would have of Pave would be you and your LinkedIn profile. And you're already doing a good thing with your messaging, but I'm wondering, was there like anything in particular you did with optimizing your LinkedIn profile so when the AEs saw it, they were like, I probably want to work for this guy?
The major things that I would do is there are things that a recruiter would normally send inside of a message, like, we have amazing benefits. This is the type of team we're trying to build. 7 bullets on that. And instead, I actually keep that in the job description under my title of head of sales or eventually VP of sales at Pave. So for example, I would send the simple 3x3 message of notice this about you, very short sentence on what we're building. Are you open to hearing more? But then if they clicked on my profile and they looked at my Pave job description, I would usually have a longer description, which is my goal is to build a world-class sales team at Pave. We currently have 3 AEs and we're growing to 8. Here's what we're all about. Boom, 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 and boom. And we would often talk about things like we're building a team of reps who know how to sell in a way that doesn't feel like selling. We're operating with the mindset of 3 great AEs outperform 10 okay ones. And so I'd have these little selling points that were inside of my own mini landing page, but I wasn't sending all of that in the outbound email. I would wait for them to click on my profile. I think it also helps that I was at 30 Minutes to President's Club and I had a brand from there. But the reality, folks, is 30 MPC was at a much younger phase when I first started at Pave. And also I was at a pretty big disadvantage because I was, again, literally the 9th employee at Pave. No one had heard of our company at all.
So nobody had heard of Pave then, but you took the team from 100K of ARR to 13 million of ARR in just about 2 years. And so the team got much, much bigger and things started to scale to the point where you had recruiters who were doing outbound. Talk to me about how you worked those recruiters to help you still get really great talent.
I have two types of SDRs. I have SDRs that find deals, and I have SDRs that find people. Recruiters are my SDRs that find people. So what I did is I pushed really, really hard to get a dedicated sourcer for the go-to-market function because I knew how to work outbounders better than the engineering team would. And I was like, I want someone all to my own that I can have and put on like an outbound metric quota to go find people. And so there's this girl, her name was Olivia. She's awesome. She's actually an SDR at Rippling right now because she was such a good sourcer. And I put Olivia on a quota. It wasn't a number quota, it was a stake quota. And so what I said is you need to reach out to this many people per week. And it was like 25 to 50 candidates per day or something like that. And then eventually that ramped up to 200 people per week. And she started getting really, really good at this thing. She started booking like 5 screens a week. And so what I said is I gave her a quarterly number. Is 5 screens per week, that gets you to 25 screens per month, that gets you to about 75 in a quarter. I was like, if you hit 75 screens in a quarter, I'm going to bring you to a Wagyu steakhouse with you and your best friend on the recruiting team. And every single week, she was like counting the numbers. She's like, this is 10 screens, this is 15 screens, this is 30 screens. I'm on my way to the steak, right? And so what I was doing is I was managing both the inputs and the outputs versus what a lot of other people do is they just sit in the chair and they assume that their recruiters are going to operate their function like a sales function. But the reality is there's usually not the same level of discipline and rigor in all other recruiting functions. A lot of recruiters just like sit on inbound, they screen the resumes in Lever and Greenhouse, and they're just like, oh, could you reach out to your network? Can we throw a sourcing jam or whatever? And nothing actually happens from it. That's how you actually get your recruiters to work is you make them do the outbound. And I had them sending the exact same 3-step drip from my inbox. And so that's the first thing that you do to work recruiters. The second thing you do to work recruiters when you start to get to a bigger team is this was a hidden secret. So I hired, I would say 25 to 33% of my team from sourcing jams. So what we would do is I wouldn't just go in the team meeting and be like, if anyone has a referral to a great AE, please let me know. Because 9 times out of 10, you get nothing. What I would do, again, I'm pretty direct. I would put my team in a room over lunch and I'd be like, hey, it's 60 minutes long. You gotta sit here for the full 60 minutes. You get to leave if you put 10 people on this spreadsheet. Put 10 people that you know, whether or not they're looking, in the spreadsheet, and you need proof that you've sent them the first message before you leave this room. Otherwise, you're staying in the room. And times 8 AEs led to 80 warm referrals, led to 1 way better candidate quality, and to a much higher conversion. I had like more interviews than I could possibly know what to do with by the sourcing jams and the outbound sourcers.
There's one other type of recruiter, which would be a recruiting agency. It sounds like you were working with in-house recruiters. What's your take on agencies and how you might work with them?
So agencies are, they're like really hit or miss. So I won't name which agencies are good ones and bad ones, but there are some bad ones, and you'll notice the bad ones are just shilling you these like weird off-industry like reps who didn't do well, or they have these janky profiles or whatever it is, and you need to cut those as soon as humanly possible. So when you're vetting sourcers or when you're vetting outsourced agencies, I always say, here's my profile. Before we even engage, please send me 10 example profiles of people you think would fit our mold that you're either in touch with or that you would reach out to. And if they can't follow those basic instructions, to me, you're not even listening, and you and I are speaking completely different languages. Once you find a good sourcer, you have to understand that those sourcers are oftentimes incentivized to work with the clients who are loosest on their hiring guidelines. So the way these agencies are paid is they're paid to fill a role. And so if you're really, really, really difficult with them, or if you make it clear that you have a super, super high bar, they're oftentimes going to like loosen the gas. They're going to stop sending you candidates. They're going to stop paying attention to you. So the same way you work your recruiters, I would do a weekly stand-up with my internal recruiters. I would do a weekly stand-up with my external recruiters as well. I wouldn't lower my bar, but I would squeeze them and I would say like, look, we're going to cancel this retainer if you can't get me 3 to 5 qualified candidates per week. The other thing that I find is that recruiting agencies will oftentimes send you these profiles and they'll say their average deal size is this, their average attainment was this. It always is like our average deal size was like 50% larger than it actually was. It was actually a 20K deal size, but it says 50 to 100K. And their attainment always says it was like 110, 125%. But if you back channel them, it's usually 70 to 80%. And so whenever you're getting candidates from agencies, you have to back channel them because your recruiters on your internal team are incentivized to help you make the right hire because they're part of your company. Your recruiters on the agency side are incentivized to get you to hire a candidate and actually hide mistakes with those candidates.
How do you back channel a candidate?
So just to preface this, folks, I know a lot of people might get uneasy when we talk about the topic of back channeling, but the unfortunate reality is we are in the business of sales, and salespeople are really good at talking. Salespeople are also really good at lying, the bad ones. If you've run an ethical sales process or an ethical recruiting process, you have nothing to worry about. If things are coming up in the back channel, then that means you were just lying in the interview process, because I'm never asking questions in a back channel interview that I didn't ask you first. I'm just triangulating the truth. So when I'm trying to back channel someone, the first thing I'll do is I'll go to their LinkedIn and I'll look at all of my first degree connections. And if I can find someone, ideally I have at least 2 back channels per person. And if you think this sounds like a lot, for executive hires, we would typically do a minimum of 5 back channels, usually 10 back channels. 10 back channels, cross-functional, like leaders, reps, like all around. So that's number 1, first degree connections. But then number 2, oftentimes you won't have first degree connections. And so you have to connect with everyone at your company, not only because it makes your sourcing efforts easier, but it makes your back channel efforts easier. And so what would happen is Matt, our CEO, would always be back channeling other executives, and he would oftentimes ping me for a VP of customer success that I was connected to. And he would be like, hey, you know this person that knows this VP of customer success. Armand, could you ask this second degree connection to jump on a call with the CEO of Pave, me? And so you have to use your network to do back channels. And folks, I know it sounds like a lot of work. It is way more work to unwind a bad hire. So do the back channeling upfront. And the last thing is, where does this actually happen in the interview process? I always do this right before offer. So I really try not to back channel until I'm certain that the person is actually willing to make the move with us and we're ready to give them an offer. And I also never, ever back channel at their company. I always try to back channel at another company that they were at.
Okay, so let's talk about, you've got an interview scheduled. It's an outbound sourced interview. Your messaging even was, hey, I assume you're crushing it. My guess is you're not looking. How are you running that intro meeting with a prospective candidate?
Yeah, so inbound interviews are completely different. You can do the intro, the mini pitch, and you can basically just start grilling them. Outbound interviews, you heard my message. It was, my guess is you're crushing it. You're probably not looking to leave. Are you open to chatting and just hearing what we're about? And most people will respond, I'm not looking to leave, but I'm open to connect. And so there are 3 or 4 parts of my interview. They jump on, we build rapport, all of that nonsense. I set an agenda. First thing I do is, let me give you like a 1-minute spiel on what we're building at Pave, just so you get a sense of like what we're all about, and my questions don't make 0 sense at all. From there, I would frankly just like love to understand like why you took the call in the first place. And I'd love to just understand a little bit about like your sales motion and what's made you successful, and give you a sense of if it would even make sense for you to like consider something like us, because you might be selling something completely different and it might not be a fit on both ways. So does that sound good to you? Right? And so from there, what I do is, again, to recap, the 3 parts of that are, number 1, the mini pitch. Number 2, why did you take the call? And number 3, like just get a high level sense of like how you're selling, what you're selling today, and what's made you successful. And that's when I give them the opportunity to brag about themselves. So I'll pause there.
What did your mini pitch, that 1-minute spiel, sound like?
So the 3 things that would go into my mini pitch were, number 1, why Pave? Number 2, why this team? And then number 3, why you? So the why Pave, I would usually say things like, look, man, I wasn't looking to leave either, but I actually got poached from my old company, which was doing really well to Pave. And the reason for that is like there are a few startups like Pave that have raised monster rounds like this that are growing this quickly that are also willing to give a VP of sales like me who's reasonably young, like complete reins to build a sales org that is not bloated like every other team. And so here are some mantras around like how we've built this team. And that's when I get into the like we have a group of folks who's really tight. They're a lean elite team of reps. They could be a team of 10, but we're a team of 4. And one of our mantras is we learn how to sell in a way that doesn't feel like selling. And that's part of the reason that I reached out to you is I find that usually reps at that growth stage at your company over there, it seems like you've done well. It seems like you've gotten promoted quickly. And usually those are the types of people who are not only really good reps, but they're the types of folks who are the builders and they're not part of this old enterprise sales guard where they feel that they need to create these adversarial relationships with their prospects. And so that's what I thought I was getting when I reached out to you, but I'm curious, like, why did you take the call? And so that's a little bit old, but those are the 3 parts of my pitch. Why company, why Pave, and then why you?
What were some common responses you would get for why they took the call? I'm sure there was a whole spectrum of being like, hey, I wasn't really looking to leave, but like now that I think about it more, I am ready for a new challenge. And then there are also people who were maybe a little bit more stonewally where they were like, just good to make connections.
That's actually the 2 buckets they're split into. The first bucket is the people who are like, yeah, just connect, see what's out there. The second bucket are folks who they'll give you some hints where they'll be like, yeah, you know, things are going well, but I'm coming up on 3 years and I feel like I'm not growing as much, or I feel like I might want to go into a more complex sales cycle, or I was thinking about getting a little bit more autonomy or going to the early stage, or I was thinking about a place where I might be able to grow into a manager role a little bit sooner. So if you get those hints, those breadcrumbs, you got to pull on them. And you got to understand, like, tell me more about what your team looks like today. You want to be a manager? Tell me about like why you want to be a manager. What do you think it takes to get there and all that stuff. And now I'm in a little bit of like a career development conversation. If they're giving you nothing, you actually treat this the same way you treat a discovery call, which is say, why'd you take the call? They're like, yeah, just looking. It's like, my guess is you don't take a call with every single person who reaches out to you. I'm sure there was like something either about Pave or our background or my message or something you saw on my LinkedIn profile that was like moderately interesting. What piqued your eye? And there's always something. So get your first breadcrumbs, do discovery on those breadcrumbs. And then I usually like to turn and I like to disguise my interview as giving them an opportunity to gloat about themselves. And so again, I can't really grill them because they weren't expecting a call, but I sort of need to know if they're even half decent at sales. And so I'm going to use Cunningham's law. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell them that they're really good and I'm going to blow up their ego and I'm going to use that as my reason to understand how you sell. And so I might say, well, Nick, look, it sounds like you want to be a manager and like there are a ton of opportunities to do that here. But before I get into all that stuff, I'm curious, man. Like I saw your resume, you got promoted a couple times. It looks like you made club. Like you're clearly doing the right stuff over at Acme. Like what is it that's making you one of those reps top of the board versus everyone else? Or like how are you selling different from everyone else? And if you'll get answers like, well, I sell value, or, you know, I ask the hard questions, I'll unpack them. And if they can't give me tactical answers, I'm like, you don't actually know your stuff. But you have to lean with curiosity. Like, you sell value, that sounds awesome. Like, how do you actually go about doing that? Where does that happen? Does it happen on a discovery call? Like, is it the way you ask questions? What are, like, types of questions you ask? And you'll just act curious about how they're successful. But if they can't actually explain how they're successful, then I know it's probably not the right candidate.
Awesome. That's really smart. What you do is you say, hey, you're better than everybody else. Clearly, it's actually why I reached out. What sets you apart? And they think it's just a brag opportunity. But for you, you're understanding how they communicate, their own self-awareness, what makes them different. It's a really, really smart approach. You get to the end of the call. You know this is somebody that you want to bring aboard the team. How do you sell them on going through the interview journey?
So if I don't like them, I just say like, awesome. I'll either tell them that it's not a fit and I'll be honest about why it is, or I'll say like, hey, so I'm meeting with a bunch of other people this week and I'll do the classic, we'll be in touch, yada, yada. But if it's someone that I like, I'm going to use a line that Kevin Dorsey or KD uses on discovery calls. Notice the parallels between sales discovery calls and recruiting discovery calls. Yeah. I'm going to use, I think this might make sense. And so I'm going to say like, honestly, Nick, like I jump on 10 of these calls a week, and 9 times out of 10, I think a lot of people think I'm trying to sell them. But in reality, like, I know the candidate's not a fit. And I think you might have just the crazy enough profile where you could help me build this team. And I think you do really, really well. And I know you said you wanted to be a manager. I also know you said you're not looking. But part of me feels like there's something here. And I'm inclined to like ask you if you'd even be open to considering us in a formal interview process. And so what I'm doing is I'm stroking the ego again. I'm saying, hey, you're like total badass. You're like one of the few people that I'm actually saying yes to. But I'm also pushing away. I'm saying like, hey, like, I know you're probably not looking, but like, would you actually give it a shot and just like learn a little bit more with us? And if they don't opt in at that point, then they're gone. But usually at that point, they'll opt into the interview process if I've done a good job, and then I can turn on the grill.
Armand, this has been a phenomenal episode, but we're running out of time. So I got to move to our final question, which is this. We've talked about a lot of really great things sales leaders should be doing when they are outbounding talent. Now I got to ask you about a shouldn't related to that topic. So what is one bad habit or mistake you see sales leaders making when it comes to outbounding for talent that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Evaluating outbound candidates before selling them. It's the number one mistake people make. Is they think outbound first interviews should be farmed off to their recruiters. So the recruiters jump on these calls with these outbound candidates and they start giving them qualification questions. What are your OTE expectations? Why are you looking to leave your company? But folks, they're not looking. Or the hiring manager comes in and starts ripping them with tough sales interview questions. But again, they're not looking. And so a lot of people take the funnel approach to recruiting. They try to interview as many candidates as possible, and they lose all the good people at the top. And what they're left with is a pool of mediocre people at the bottom, or they're left with people who were never sold from the beginning. And then once you get to offer, they get a declined offer because the person made their decision by the third round. And so instead, what I would prefer to do is I actually prefer to spend more time at the top of the funnel, so that if I can find the 10 best candidates at the top of the funnel, I can get all 10 to the bottom of the funnel and have a 100% offer accept ratio. And so I had over an 80% offer accept ratio at Pave. This was an early stage company. We were not paying top of market because we were an early stage company, but I knew when we got someone that late, it was my choice, not theirs.
Yeah, you invert the funnel is the way that I've heard you describe it. So Armand, thank you for joining us. Killer episode. All right, folks, it's time for your 60-second recap, your 2x2, really my 4 takeaways from this episode. Number 1, you've got to make sure that you connect with every single person who works at your company so that you can more easily back channel the talent that you were talking to. If you're not connected with an engineer on your team and turns out they're connected with someone who can give you info about a candidate, you're missing a really good opportunity. Number 2 is when you are outbounding candidates, use a 3-step drip. Message number 1 is what you know about them, why you think they might want to talk with Pave, you know they're not looking, and open to having a look. Message number 2 is a bubble up. Message number 3 is, hey, here's a bit more about the team. If it's not you, know anyone else that might be a good fit for this. So the referral ask. Takeaway number 3 is when you are giving that mini pitch about your company and why they should even be engaged on this call up front, there's a 3-part framework. The first piece is a personal story and why being at the company is compelling for you. The next piece is a bit about your team philosophy, the type of team that you're trying to build. And then 3, end with why I reached out to you in the first place, what I noticed about you that impressed me. So that's how you sell them up front on, hey, here's why you should engage with me. And number 4 is when you are having an initial interview with somebody that you outbounded, you still need to suss out whether or not they're any good, but you can't do that the traditional way by grilling them with questions. Instead, point out, hey, you're one of the top performers on your team. My guess is you're doing something different. Tell me about what sets you apart from the team. What are the things you're doing different? And ask them to brag. The quality, the content of what's in their bragging will help you determine whether or not they're actually good. All right, Armand, that's it. How can people help us out?
Well, folks, If you liked what you got here, the next natural step is running the interview process. So I actually broke down my 4-step account executive interview process that happens after that first initial screen in one of our newsletters. And so I'm going to put a link to that newsletter down in the show notes. I would go check that out. And folks, if you like that, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed to our newsletter. I personally write it every single week, and the first newsletter of every single month is dedicated to leadership topics like this. So folks, subscribe to the newsletter, check it out in the show notes, and we'll see you on the next one.